I thought she was just my landlady, until the night she slid closer on the couch, and our legs touched. When I first moved into the old brick apartment building, I didn't expect much more than creaky stairs, thin walls, and the faint smell of coffee drifting from neighbors' kitchens. I was 24, fresh out of college, and renting felt like one more step into adulthood. My landlady greeted me at the door that afternoon. She was in her early 40s, tall and graceful in a way that made time seem irrelevant. There was something quietly magnetic about her presence, not in a loud or flashy sense, but in the way she carried herself, calm and assured, like the building belonged to her in more ways than just paperwork. "Welcome," she said with a warm smile, pressing the keys into my hand. Her voice was low and steady, the kind of tone that makes you want to listen a little longer than necessary. She insisted on showing me around. I followed her through the narrow hallways, listening as she explained which doors stuck in the winter, where the light switches hid, how the hot water needed a patient hand. The way she spoke made it feel less like instructions and more like she was inviting me into something personal, something lived in. Her hand skimmed along the door frames as she walked, fingertips brushing wood as if it were second nature. I couldn't help but notice the subtle details, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when it slipped loose, or how her smile lingered when she pointed out the small balcony crowded with plants she tended herself. "It gets the best light in the morning," she said, stepping aside so I could see. The balcony was filled with herbs, little clay pots of lavender and basil. It smelled fresh, alive, like a corner of the world she had claimed for beauty's sake alone. I caught myself watching her more than the apartment. The curve of her expression when she spoke about the place carried something beyond business. Pride, maybe, or a tenderness that had nothing to do with me. Still, I felt it all the same. When we finally stepped back into the living room, I realized how quiet it had grown. Outside, the city moved on with its usual rhythm, but inside, the air felt slowed down, like we were in a pocket of stillness only the two of us shared. She smoothed the fabric of her skirt before sitting on the edge of the couch. I stood awkwardly for a moment, then sat across from her. She leaned back slightly, eyes meeting mine with a calmness I didn't expect. "You'll be fine here," she said, almost as if it were a promise rather than a statement. And for reasons I couldn't put into words, I believed her. That night, as I unpacked my boxes, I found myself replaying little details in my mind. The sound of her voice, the way she looked at her plants, the warmth in her smile when she said goodbye. She was just my landlady, nothing more. But even then, something in me knew she would not remain just that for long. The first week passed in a blur of unpacked boxes and late nights. My new apartment was livable, but the walls still felt bare, and the silence carried an unfamiliar weight. I kept the window open most evenings just to hear the hum of the city below, as if it might remind me I wasn't completely alone up there. It was my landlady who broke that silence. One evening, after watching me struggle with a pile of books too heavy for one trip, she appeared at my door with a gentle knock. "Tea?" she asked, holding up a tray with 2 mugs. Her tone was casual, but her smile made it feel like more than a neighborly gesture. I hesitated at first. Landlords don't usually offer tea, at least not in my experience. But she stepped past me with the ease of someone who had lived here far longer than I had. She set the tray down on the coffee table I'd only half assembled and sat comfortably on the edge of the couch, as if she'd been here 100 times before. The steam curled up from the mugs, carrying a hint of mint. I sat across from her, box cutter still in my hand, and she gave me a look that was equal parts amused and patient. "You work too fast," she said softly. "Give yourself time to settle. The boxes aren't going anywhere." I laughed, rubbing the back of my neck. "Guess I don't know how to sit still." Her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary. Then she lifted her cup and sipped. The movement was simple, ordinary, but there was something in the way she did it, measured, graceful, that made me feel clumsy in comparison. We talked easily. She asked about my studies, my work, where I grew up. I noticed how carefully she listened. She didn't just nod politely. She tilted her head slightly, rested her chin against her hand, and let me finish every thought without interruption. That kind of attention is rare, and it made me slow down, speak more deliberately, as if my words mattered. I learned small things about her, too. She loved her plants because they gave the balcony life no matter the season. She read late into the night, often with music playing softly in the background. She had lived in this building long enough to watch neighbors come and go, yet she still remembered names, little stories. At some point, I realized we had both finished our tea, but neither of us moved to end the conversation. The city lights flickered outside the window, painting her face in a soft glow. For a moment, I felt a pull I couldn't quite name, something quiet but magnetic. I reminded myself she was just being kind, a good landlady, a generous neighbor. Still, when she rose to leave, I noticed the faint brush of her hand against the arm of the couch, almost as though she were reluctant to go. That night, the silence of my apartment didn't feel as heavy. Her presence lingered in the air, softer than the hum of the city, but far more difficult to ignore. The rain started in the late afternoon, light at first, just a drizzle that tapped against the balcony railings. I didn't think much of it until the sky darkened. Thunder rolled low in the distance, and the whole building seemed to hum with the weight of the storm. By the time the lights flickered, I was standing in the middle of my half-furnished apartment, wondering if I should find a candle or just sit in the dark. That's when I heard a soft knock at my door. She stood there, my landlady, holding a blanket over her shoulders and smiling like the storm was nothing more than background music. "Power's been acting up in this building for years," she said, her voice calm against the growl of thunder. "You don't have to sit alone upstairs. Come down for a bit." I hesitated, but the lights dimmed again, and before I could answer, she was already leading me down the hallway. Her presence felt steady, like she had weathered storms much larger than this one. Her apartment smelled faintly of cedar and citrus. Candles glowed from the coffee table and kitchen counter, scattering soft light across the room. It was cozy in a way that made me instantly aware of how bare mine still was. She motioned for me to sit on the couch, then spread the blanket across the space between us. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the balcony doors. She leaned back, her legs tucked neatly to the side, while I sat more rigidly, trying not to seem out of place. "Storms make this building feel older than it is," she said, watching the flicker of candlelight. "Like it carries memories you can almost hear if you listen." I listened, though not to the walls. I listened to her voice, low and steady, as though it belonged to the rain itself. When the thunder cracked, she shifted closer, sliding the blanket across my lap so it covered us both. Our knees brushed, just barely, and the contact jolted through me like a second kind of electricity. She didn't move away. Instead, she adjusted the fabric casually, as if nothing unusual had happened, though the space between us felt suddenly charged. The scent of her perfume, something floral warm, mixed with the damp air sneaking in through the balcony door. I became aware of every small sound. The rain, the tick of a candle wick, even the rhythm of her breathing. We talked in fragments. She asked about my family. I asked about hers. She told me her son had moved out recently, leaving the apartment quieter than she liked. There was a flicker in her eyes when she mentioned it, a softness edged with loneliness. I wanted to say something comforting, but the words stayed lodged in my throat. Instead, I let the silence settle, not heavy, but close. Our knees still touched under the blanket, and for once, I didn't feel the need to move away. The storm outside raged on, but in that moment, the world had narrowed to the space of her living room, the glow of candlelight, and the quiet nearness we hadn't yet dared to name. The storm showed no sign of letting up. Rain hammered against the balcony doors, and the candles trembled in their glass holders each time the wind pressed hard against the windows. Yet inside her apartment, it felt strangely calm, as if the world had been reduced to just this room, this couch, and the soft light between us. She was speaking quietly, almost to herself. "It's different now," she said, her gaze fixed on the streaks of water sliding down the glass. "Since my son moved out, the place feels larger than it used to, quieter, sometimes too quiet." Her voice carried something I hadn't heard before, a thread of loneliness woven through her usual composure. For the first time, I noticed the way her shoulders sagged slightly, as if she carried the weight of that emptiness in the rooms around her. I shifted, wanting to say something that might ease her expression. But before I could find the words, she moved. Not far, not suddenly, just a small adjustment, a subtle shift across the couch. And then our legs touched. The contact was almost nothing. Fabric against fabric, a brush of warmth in the space where we sat. But it was enough to still my breathing. Enough to make me hyper-aware of the exact point where we met. She didn't move away. If anything, she seemed anchored there, her body angled slightly toward mine. My pulse hammered in my chest, and I stared at the candle flame flickering between us, as though it might steady me. The seconds stretched. I told myself not to read into it, not to mistake kindness for intention. But then I glanced sideways and caught her watching me. Not directly, but in the quiet, searching way people look when they're not sure if they should be caught. Her lips parted, as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, her hand smoothed over the edge of the blanket, brushing closer to mine, stopping just short of touch. I could feel the warmth radiating from her even through the fabric. It wasn't bold, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, almost under her breath. "I forget myself sometimes." The apology startled me, but her tone wasn't sharp. It was wistful, almost self-mocking. She leaned back, but only slightly, as though even she wasn't sure if she meant to retreat. "You don't have to," I found myself saying, the words out before I could stop them. Her eyes flicked to mine, quick and searching, as if weighing whether I meant it. And then, just for a moment, her expression softened into something unguarded. Something that said she wanted the closeness as much as I did, even if neither of us dared admit it aloud. Outside, thunder rolled, loud enough to rattle the glass. But in that moment, the sound barely reached me. All I could feel was the warmth of her leg against mine, steady and unyielding. A simple connection that said more than words could manage. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a kiss. It was something quieter, smaller, but it was the beginning of a truth we could no longer ignore. The storm stretched on, as if the world outside had decided to hold its breath. The candles flickered, shadows slipping across the walls, and the space between us on the couch felt impossibly small. Our legs still touched beneath the blanket, steady, unbroken. She hadn't moved away and I hadn't either. But something hung in the air now, thicker than silence, heavier than the rain. Her fingers toyed with the edge of the blanket. At first, it looked absent-minded, the way someone distracts themselves during a pause in conversation. But then the fabric shifted closer, brushing my hand. It wasn't quite touch, not yet, but it was close enough to send a current through me. She noticed. I could see it in the way her shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath, in the way her gaze flicked to the floor before lifting back to me. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, almost too quietly to catch over the rain, she spoke. "It's been a long time since I've sat this close to anyone." Her words lingered, vulnerable and unpolished. I turned toward her, watching the candlelight catch the lines of her face. Beautiful lines, softened with years, but strong in their own way. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't playing coy. She was telling me something real. I wanted to answer, but my throat felt tight. So I stayed still, letting her continue if she wished. She exhaled slowly, her eyes drifting toward the storm outside. "When my son left, I thought I'd feel free. I thought I'd finally have space for myself. But instead, I come home to rooms that feel empty. Quiet in a way that doesn't soothe you. Quiet that weighs on you." Her hand brushed against mine again, this time less by accident, more by choice. Her fingertips hovered, grazing just enough to be felt. She didn't pull back. "I forget what it's like," she whispered, "to share silence with someone, to not have to fill it with words." I let the silence stretch, not because I didn't know what to say, but because she was right. This silence was different. It wasn't awkward or cold. It was alive, humming with everything we weren't yet ready to say aloud. So instead of breaking it, I shifted slightly, just enough that my hand stayed beneath hers. Not a bold move, not something to startle her. Just an agreement, quiet but sure, that I was listening, that I understood. Her eyes flicked to mine again, and for a fleeting second, she looked younger. Not because of her features, but because of the openness there, the hope that hadn't fully disappeared. No declarations were made, no promises spoken. But the weight of that moment was its own kind of confession. Hers in the words she gave me, mine in the silence I chose to share with her. And as the storm pressed against the glass, I realized it wasn't the thunder or the rain that filled the room. It was her nearness, her honesty, the kind of intimacy that grows not from touch alone, but from the courage to be seen. The rain softened, falling in steadier rhythms now, like the storm itself was settling down. But inside, the storm hadn't passed. If anything, it had shifted inward, into the space between us, into the air that pulsed with everything unspoken. We were still on the couch, the blanket gathered loosely around our legs. Her hand lingered near mine, our fingertips brushing now and then, as though neither of us wanted to make the first move but neither wanted to retreat. She turned toward me, her profile lit by candlelight. "You're quiet," she murmured. I swallowed. "I don't want to say the wrong thing." Her lips curved, not quite a smile, but something close. Sometimes, there doesn't need to be a right thing to say. Her words pressed against me, soft but heavy. I wanted to reach for her, to bridge the inches between us. My chest rose and fell with a rhythm I couldn't control. Every detail of her steady breathing, the faint perfume that lingered on her skin, the warmth radiating from her body, pulled me closer without me moving at all. She lifted her hand then, almost casually, almost like a reflex. Her fingers brushed against my hair, tucking a stray lock back from my forehead. The gesture was gentle, careful, but it carried something more than kindness. It lingered a second too long, her touch hovering as if testing the distance between us. I turned my head, just slightly, just enough that when she pulled her hand back, it paused near my cheek. Her breath caught. Mine did too. We weren't kissing, not yet. But everything in the world seemed to tilt toward that possibility. My heart pounded in my ears. Her lips parted, as though she meant to say something, but no words came. The silence swelled. Our eyes held, neither of us daring to break it. I leaned forward a fraction, so small it could have been nothing or everything. She didn't move away. For a moment, time fractured into fragments. The flicker of the candle, the whisper of rain against glass, the brush of her hand still hovering near my skin. It was the kind of moment you know you'll never forget, no matter how it ends. Then, with a shaky breath, she closed her eyes. Not fully, just enough to betray the conflict inside her. I felt it mirrored in me. Want and hesitation, both sharp, both undeniable. Her eyes opened again. Steady now, but full of something unspoken. She exhaled, and the smallest shake of her head followed, gentle, almost apologetic. The space between us remained, still charged, still alive, but uncrossed. I leaned back, just enough to let her know I understood. Her hand slipped away, and the room felt colder for it. But even in the restraint, there was truth. That almost moment carried a weight of its own. A silent admission that we both felt it, even if neither of us said it aloud. And sometimes the hardest part isn't what you do, it's what you almost do and how it lingers long after. The storm began to fade sometime past midnight. The thunder that once rattled the windows had retreated into the distance, leaving behind only the steady patter of rain. The candles on her table had burned low, their wax pooling at the edges, and the room was wrapped in a hushed stillness that felt fragile, like a secret. We hadn't moved much since that almost. Her hand brushing my hair back, the air holding us in that suspended place where neither of us could step forward or away. Now we sat with a space between us, small but deliberate, as though we both knew what almost happened and were quietly deciding what to do with it. When the power finally returned, the lamps flickered back to life. The sudden brightness broke the spell, reminding us of the ordinary world just outside this moment. She blinked, adjusting to the light, then leaned back against the couch with a quiet sigh. "You should probably get some rest," she said softly. Her tone carried no command, only care. I nodded, though I didn't move right away. I looked at her, really looked, taking in the calm set of her features, the tired but gentle curve of her lips. There was something in her expression that made my chest tighten. A mix of longing, restraint, and something close to relief. "I don't want to leave," I admitted before I could stop myself. Her eyes met mine, steady and searching. For a heartbeat, I thought she might tell me to stay. But instead, she smiled small, wistful. "You make me forget the years," she whispered. The words slipped out as though she hadn't meant to speak them aloud. The honesty of it rooted me to the spot. I wanted to tell her how I felt too, that she made this building feel less like walls and more like a home, that her presence had filled my empty nights with something I didn't know I'd been missing. So I said it as best I could. "You make me feel at home," I told her quietly. Her smile deepened, softening her whole face. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out, her hand brushing lightly against mine. Not a bold gesture, just a touch, fleeting but real. Then she drew back, the weight of the unspoken heavy between us. I stood slowly, reluctant to break the moment but knowing it couldn't stretch on forever. At the door, I turned once more. She was still on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, watching me with eyes that carried more than words could say. "Good night," I whispered. She gave the smallest nod, her expression unreadable, though her eyes lingered on me as if to hold me there a second longer. I stepped back into the hallway, the hum of electricity returning to the building. Yet even as I closed the door behind me, the warmth of her nearness, her words, her touch, those stayed with me. We hadn't crossed the line. Maybe we never would. But what we shared that night was undeniable. A truth that didn't need labels, didn't need promises. Just two people caught in the quiet aftermath of a storm, changed by what had almost happened, and by what already had. Sparkles this ending lands on together but uncertain. Emotionally resolved, deeply intimate, but Levy, if this story moved you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who loves a good slow burn romance, and subscribe for more heartfelt age gap love stories. Your support helps me bring more of these moments to life. In the future open.